Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show, episode 100. Thanks, everybody. Joining us now, making her debut on this auspicious show, is Brooke Thomas. She's a TV journalist and co-host at the Young Turks. Brooke, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be doing this for the first time.
It's awesome to have you. We are going to talk about, we're going to have a very New York-centric show. And we have at least segment. And let's start. We're gonna do the bizarre, messed up one second, and do this really disgusting but really important one first. And we're gonna play this clip of Donald Trump talking about the Central Park Five. And to me, there's a lot of conversation about the Central Park Five, and I feel like there's a new show on Netflix. It's back in the public conversation. And to me, obviously there's thousands of different examples of Donald Trump. He's sort of like a synthesis of all of the worst things about this country. But I think you could look at the Central Park Five as the perfect window into understanding everything about this man and his presidency. So I'm going to throw to you in a second, but first I just want to play 15 seconds of a PBS documentary of Donald Trump talking about the Central Park Five.
You better believe that I hate the people that took this girl and raped her brutally. You better believe it. And it's more than anger, it's hatred. And I want society to hate him.
Brooke, first of all, could you talk a little bit about, and I believe you call them the Exonerated Five, and Donald Trump's relationship to them?
Yeah, well, it's bizarre because as a private citizen, we know he's had issues with race, period, just with how he handled his own buildings, his own companies. We know that from the beginning. But as a private citizen, he took it upon himself to take out this full-page ad, essentially asking for the death penalty for, at that point, what was a group of 5 children who hadn't been convicted of anything yet. It was just, this is the story going around the city. This is who did it. There were these kids in the park. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. And this is what happened to a woman who doesn't remember what happened to her. And they need to die. And, I was talking about something the other day. I think that the Central Park Five case in general, it exposes so many problems with our criminal justice system. One, how easily and I hate kind of using the phrase mob mentality, but it really does happen. It's more than when we're talking about, canceling an actress who said the N-word. We're talking about people's lives and children's lives, and none of really the details were out at all. No real proof or real DNA or identifiable evidence or eyewitnesses. And everyone decided that these 5 boys did it because they were little black kids who weren't from great neighborhoods. And the man who was to become the president of the United States, he jumped on that and was a leader in that. He spent thousands of dollars to call for their death. Not only that, but we do have the big issues with the criminal justice system and how children are treated and the problems that can occur when you send a kid to Rikers and then to men's penitentiaries. There so many issues, and my biggest issue with this now is that the president of the United States is still not willing to apologize after they've been wholly exonerated. And not only that, but
talk about that more. Yeah.
So they have been exonerated. The man who actually did this confessed. Not only did he confess, but the DNA put him at the scene of the crime. Just him. Only him. He confessed completely. He knew details that were never released. And not only that, but he was a serial rapist and a murderer. And not only were these 5 boys, their lives were ruined. And I'm glad that they're still alive and they're able to change their lives now. But there were things that happened to these boys at the time that they can never go back and they can never just wipe away and erase. You put somebody in prison as a child, and one of the boys was sent to a men's prison, a state prison. When you put them in jail and prison as children for years, you can't just wipe that clean and the trauma that comes from that once they are set free. So yeah, their lives have changed forever. But not only did the person who did this ruin, a big part at least of their lives, but there were women who wouldn't have been raped, a woman who wouldn't have been murdered. Her children would still have their mother had the police been focused on catching the person whose DNA was at the scene of the crime.
Yeah, and I just want to read out. It's Corey Wise, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, Antron McCrae, and Yusuf Salim. And they were all charged between the ages of 14 and 16 years old. They were dragged into a police station. They were not given proper representation. And they were basically bullied into confessing to something they didn't do. And at the time, there was this whole idea, I think it was, I'm so bad right now because I'm forgetting it. I think it was called wilding. But there was this,
that's what they called it.
Yeah, that's like tabloid. Can you talk about that? And I guess too, like with Trump, and I just want to quote really briefly too. He wrote, this is all, in block letters. And I just want to say, I'm not even trying to make a cheap joke here, but it's like, this is something that Donald Trump actually paid for, right? Like we know that Donald Trump has like a history of not paying people after they do work for him or anything. He immediately actually wrote a check to get an ad in a New York newspaper saying, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police, all in bold letters. So there's like a through line of, as you said, the criminal justice system. Then there's this tabloid culture that makes up this, this notion of like wilding versus like, I don't know, kids of all backgrounds, teenage boys, get up to shit. And then there's Donald Trump. Once again, because I can't separate this from the way he talks about MS-13 or terrorism or Elijah Cummings, right? Like this is the methodology of his politics.
Yeah. The words, and that's why when people say, and I don't want to get off topic too much, but when people say, should we be focusing so much on the racism, on the words? Yes, because people will tell you over and over and over again, these words are dangerous. They lead to violence. And these words match how he's treating brown people at the border. So yes, we should be focused on what comes out of his mouth. We should be focused on who he was willing to rent an apartment to. Yes, we should be focused on him spending tens of thousands of dollars to ask for just forget the Sixth Amendment when it's black kids, huh? We should be focused on the fact that he was willing to spend thousands of dollars to ask for a bunch of kids to die.
Right. And he said recently in front of the White House, there are people on both sides of that. They admitted their guilt. If you look at Linda Fairstein, if you look at some of the prosecutors, they think that the city should have never settled that case. So I'll leave it at that.
Which is so upsetting. Because if the city shouldn't have settled that case, they wouldn't have given out $41 million. They just wouldn't have. Why? But, they wouldn't have. And they did. They settled that case without admitting wrongdoing. But they settled that case. And, of course, the woman who built her career on the backs of these boys, of course she doesn't believe the city should have settled this case. That doesn't prove anything.
Right. Her whole career's at stake.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Do you feel like there is some way of understanding, like there's the racism, there's the fear, the crime and race panics, but like something about like understanding like tabloid culture? Like a lot of people talk about the reality TV, but there's something very specific, I think, about like tabloid culture and Donald Trump too.
What do you mean?
I mean, like the way that if you listen to how he talked about like putting this ad in a New York tabloid in the 80s, the way like all of the Howard Stern interviews, some of which like I'm not going to lie, I think are pretty funny, but it's like, and then going on Fox News, like at each step of his career, he's like going to these very like tabloid places and then like almost like refining how he's going to like sell things to people, whether it's reality TV or racism or a presidential campaign or a casino. I mean, I could be off on it, but to me, like when I read about this, because again, it was Trump, but it was also the New York Post. The New York Post had a headline with a picture of these boys, and it said animals. Ed Koch said things like this. There was something like the media was driving it as well in a very significant way. That's where the whole like wilding thing even comes from.
Yeah, and problems like that, I still talk about that. Problems like that Trump is not the only racist in the world. Right. And a lot of well-meaning people have for lack of better words, like racial blind spots. And and they're not willing to hire people of color in these newsrooms for many different reasons. I was just reading a piece in, I want to say, New York Times Magazine about the former editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair. And he was asked, in his 25-year tenure, was he about his hiring practices. So when it comes to hiring, having diverse hiring practices, he said that he hired based on talent. And the reporter comes back and was like, yeah, well, everybody says that. And it's true. Everybody says that. And there are no black people, no brown people in any of these jobs. Some of the greatest publications that are quick to just call out how many disparities in our criminal justice system, in our healthcare system, in our educational system do not have black and brown people in their newsrooms. Some of the biggest, most amazing places in politics who are all willing to, say that black women in the South are who's going to decide this primary, don't have black women on their staff. You know what I mean? And so if now we're at the point where we're acknowledging black and brown people and their contributions to society, but they're still not getting the job. Way back then, it was even worse. And that's what happened. You have a newsroom full of people who are all, not all, but a lot of people actually scared of little black boys or don't have a problem with that. There's not enough people to speak up and say, hey, you know what? We shouldn't publish that. Hey, you know what? We should call it racism because it is. But you know what I mean? Like the problems that we're still having today, that is a symptom of the same. You know what I mean? I think that, so I'm not surprised by that. I'm not surprised something like that took off because that's just America.
Right.
And that's what happens when you don't have people that move through this world with a different perspective. That's what happens when you don't have them next to you. You have your own beliefs, and you're willing to publish that as truth. Right. There are a lot of papers in the South that are all like just now coming out. National Geographic just did it. A lot of them now coming out and being willing to like publish these editorials apologizing for how they fueled racism decades ago and how it caused actual like physical harm to black people in the South, and how the National Geographic perpetuated these horrible stereotypes about black women. And so, I mean, we're trying to get there, but I'm not surprised. That's what happens when there's not enough people around you to say, well, wait a minute there.
Right.
Let's not call the kids animals,
Right. Let's not. Right. Just even like this very basic, like, I don't know, it's like capacity building that just like, when you are not in a monoculture.
Yeah.
That's right. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.